Okay, Assalamu alaikum everyone. I'm Dr. Shoy and today I'll be discussing renal mass and the differential diagnosis. So today's learning objectives are to how to differentiate renal cyst from the mass and to identify the malignant potential of the renal cyst and what are the benign and the malignant renal masses. Starting from the brief intro, we have a malignant, benign, inflammatory, or they can be classified upon radiographic appearance. This includes the simple cystic, complex cystic, and the solid masses. So, one of the best tools we have for the initial screening is the ultrasound, which is a non-invasive and relatively inexpensive modality that can differentiate cystic versus solid renal masses, and it is an important role for such lesions. So if you look at this picture, you must have gone through such images in your clinical career, which shows a simple cyst. And for simple cyst, we are emphasizing here because there is a strict definition for simple cyst on ultrasound, and we have to make sure if a cyst lies in this category, we can follow it on ultrasound, or we don't have to do much about these cysts. But if there is some ambiguity or some deviation from this definition, we have to consider further investigation. So definition include there must be a smooth cyst wall, a round or oval shape without internal echoes, and through transmission with strong acoustic shoulders posteriorly. So renal mass that is not clearly a simple cyst by strict ultrasound criteria should be evaluated further with CT scan. Dedicated renal CT scan remains the single most important radiographic test for delineating the nature of the renal mass. So IV administration of contrast material, like we most of the time we have seen that we're doing in triphasic CTs for and seeing the venous phase, arterial phase for accurate enhancement of the masses. So if they said that if a CT done with IV contrast show 15 Hounsfield unit, it should be considered an RCC until proven otherwise, depending upon the hardness of the lesion. Solid masses that also have substantial areas of negative CT attenuation numbers, that is below -20 Hounsfield unit, they are indicative of the fat and diagnostic for the AML, angiomyolipomas. So enhancement indicative of malignancy can also be assessed by MRI. So if we have done a proper CT scan, we don't need to get into the details by MRI. MRI is only reserved for the patient where they have some contrast allergy, like iodine contrast allergy. We can try this with the gadolinium labeled diethylene triamine pentacetic acid. So the assessment is qualitative rather than quantitative. Means we can't differentiate on the basis of Hounsfield unit. One concern with MRI with gadolinium is the uncommon but potentially serious complication of nephrogenic systemic fibrosis, which is more common in patients with CKD. Another modality we have is the renal arteriography, but it's only reserved for patients which have concomitant renal artery disease as well. It is often not possible to reliably distinguish RCC from benign renal neoplasms, including oncocytoma and fat-poor AML. So 10 to 20% of the small solid CT enhancing renal masses with features suggestive of RCC prove to be benign after surgical excision. This is the most important point because most of the benign lesion we will be discussing in a short are the biopsy diagnosis, which are diagnosed after the surgical management, including the partial or the radical nephrectomies. Renal mass biopsy is now being considered more frequently, particularly in patients who are potential candidates for a wide variety of treatment options ranging from observation to surgical excision. So if we look at the algorithm for radiographic evolution, as I've mentioned previously, we have to gone through, first of all, we have gone through the ultrasound, and if it falls under the strict definition of a simple cyst, then we just have to observe, unless it is symptomatic or it change its architecture on subsequent ultrasound. And if we have a complex cyst or a solid mass, then we need a CT scan with IV contrast. And if we found like Hounsfield unit is more than 15, then we will be considering RCC, or if it is less than -20, somewhere around -20, we will consider AML. Now we look at this chart, we have radiographic distribution of these masses, which include the simple cystic include the benign, the parapelvic, the hydronephrosis, and the calyceal diverticulum. While in complex cyst, we have the cystic RCC, hemorrhagic cyst, hyperdense cystic nephroma, MAST, Wilms tumor, and others. While strongly enhancing solid masses are the clear cell RCC, which constitute around 70% of the RCCs, and then we have the angiomyolipomas, which are around 10% of the benign lesions in the kidney, and oncocytoma, papillary RCC, and then the chromophobe RCC, which constitutes around 5 to 10% of the RCC. Then we have the moderately enhancing solid masses, which include the papillary, chromophobe, oncocytoma, and the others. While multifocal or bilateral masses include the familial, as we know they are associated with these hereditary papillary RCC or hereditary leiomyomatosis RCC, VHL disease, and few other syndromes as well. So we have metastasis most commonly from the lung, or it could be from bone, prostate, or other things. Sporadic multifocal angiomyolipomas, lymphomas, and we have infiltrative masses like lymphoma, high-grade urothelial carcinoma, sarcomatoid, and others. While talk about the calcified, the most common is the RCC, and fat-containing we have the angiomyolipoma, liposarcoma, and lipoma. So vast majority of benign renal lesions are diagnosed only after definitive therapy such as surgical intervention. Renal cysts remain the most common benign renal lesions, representing more than 70% of the asymptomatic renal masses. So the risk factor involved for the development of this is number one, most of the patients we are seeing in our setups are usually old age patients with comorbs like diabetic, hypertensive. So here we have the real most important risk factor is the increasing age, then the male gender is presence of hypertension and presence of the renal insufficiency. And they can be solitary, multiple, unilateral or bilateral. So there appears to be a higher incidence of RCC associated with the development of the acquired renal cystic disease, much like that seen with VHL disease and tuberous sclerosis, such that the pathogenesis of these cystic lesions may be quite different from that seen with the sporadic or simple minimally complex cyst. So the important thing we have to keep in mind, the association of the renal cyst with malignancy has an important aspect as well, which says that if renal cyst is sporadic, there is less chances that it will be converted into malignant also. But if it is acquired due to some other syndrome, like we have the VHL and tuberous sclerosis and things like that, they're most likely to get malignant with time. The Bosniak classification for renal cystic lesion is the most useful and widely employed method for characterizing renal cystic lesions and for assessing the likelihood of the presence of concomitant malignancy within the cyst. So if you look at the Bosniak classification, we have basically five classes. Two is further divided into 2 and 2F. The first one says that there is a simple cyst with a hairline thin wall that does not contain any septa, calcification or solid components. It measures water density in Hounsfield unit and does not enhance with IV administration of a contrastogen. And if we look at the malignant potential, it is 1.7% and there is no therapy or follow-up required. So this is the cyst with only single layer wall. There is no septa, no calcification, no solid, no smooth muscle components. So if we look at the type 2 cyst, it may contain few hairline thin septa and fine calcifications, or a short segment of slightly thickened calcification may be present in the wall or septa. Uniformly high attenuation lesions less than 3 cm are well marginated and do not enhance with IV administration. So malignant potential is about 18.5%, while no therapy or follow-up required. If you look at this type, there we can appreciate a thin septa with some sort of calcification as well. Now if we look at the 2F, it contains multiple hairline thin septa or minimal smooth thickening or walls or septa. Their wall or septa may contain calcification that may be thick and nodular, but no measurable contrast enhancement is present. These lesions are typically well marginated and totally intrarenal non-enhancing attenuation. Again, the malignant potential is 18.5%, but here we have to consider for further assessment and many treatment as well. If we look at here, we have multiple septas, calcifications, and thickening as well. So another second is the type 3 cyst. These are the indeterminate cystic masses, have thickened irregular or smooth walls or septa in which measurable contrast enhancement is present, and malignant potential here is around 33%, and definitely we need excision or ablation. So we can appreciate here thick walled septas, calcifications. And the last one is the clearly malignant cystic masses can have all the criteria of category 3 but also contain soft tissue component. And here the malignant potential is about 92.5%. These are the soft tissue component present in this cyst. If you are having this, definitely we need some surgical intervention for such cystic masses. A variety of therapeutic interventions have been described for benign symptomatic cystic lesion of the kidney. These include aspiration, surgical resection, decortication, and sclerotherapy with a variety of different agents. For type 1 cyst, we don't need any such management. For type 2 and 2F, there may be some minimal management like aspiration or decortication, things like this, or we can consider sclerotherapy. But for type 3 and 4 cysts, we definitely need some partial or complete resection. And we look at the benign and the malignant renal masses. For malignant, we have the most common one is the RCC, which is further different subtypes, including urothelial-based, squamous, adeno. We have sarcomas, and then we have the Wilms tumor, we have neuroectodermal, carcinoid, and then we have metastasis from the distant organs. So for benign lesion, most common, as I mentioned previously, 70% of the benign lesion are the cystic lesions, classified under the Bosniak classification. Then we have some solid lesions, includes most commonly angiolipoma and oncocytoma. Others are the cystic nephroma and adenomas, reninoma, although rare but important from clinical perspective. And then we have some vascular lesion as well. For inflammatory lesions or masses, we have the abscesses, focal pyelonephritis, xanthogrammatous pyelonephritis, and we have cyst and tuberculosis. So we'll be discussing briefly about oncocytoma. It includes about 3 to 5% of the kidney tumors, most common benign tumor that appear as an enhancing renal mass on cross-sectional imaging and is presumed to be RCC until surgical resection is done. There are several distinct similarities to chromophobe RCC, which is derived from the distal renal tubules. The commonality of these tumors is further evidenced in patients with the Birt-Hogg syndrome. If we talk about the Birt-Hogg syndrome, we have basically three things which are present in this such patient. Number one is the hair follicles or fibrofolliculoma, and then we have these renal cancer or cyst. It could be simple oncocytoma or it could be clear cell carcinoma or chromophobe RCC. Then we have these cysts which may rupture and cause frequent pneumothoraxis. And similarly, with the tuberous sclerosis, there we can also appreciate such features. So if we look at the histological features of this oncocytoma, we have a typical spoke wheel pattern seen on angiography, or this delayed scar on cross-sectional imaging may bring up the question of renal oncocytoma, but these findings have a poor predictive value by themselves. However, the diagnostic accuracy of percutaneous biopsy has markedly improved, especially if we done percutaneous biopsy with core biopsy in addition with the fine aspiration. So for spoke wheel appearance, looking at the CT scan, we can appreciate things something like this. Okay, treatment option range from the observation to thermal ablation, laparoscopic or open partial nephrectomy, and even radical nephrectomy depending on the clinical scenario. If oncocytoma is highly suspected and surgery is indicated, an nephron-sparing approach is preferred given the benign nature of these lesions and the very low probability of recurrence. Frozen section is usually not recommended because it is not sensitive enough to differentiate the eosinophilic appearance of oncocytoma from that of the RCC. So with thermal ablation could be the option in these cases. Another one important one is we have the angiomyolipoma. I will be giving brief description here. We will be discussing angiomyolipoma in upcoming lectures. Account for less than 10% of the renal tumors with the autopsy series, which showing that we have around 0.3% endopsy and ultrasound screening population is 0.13. So it is something rare in general population. The tumor strongly expresses the estrogen receptor, progesterone, and the androgen receptor, and predominantly found in females and is rare before the puberty, suggesting a potential hormonal influence. Most of the cases are sporadic, but can be associated with autosomal dominant, like most commonly we have heard about tuberous sclerosis. And it says that about 20 to 30% of the angiomyolopomas occur in patients with the TSC, but in patient of the TSC, that is tuberous sclerosis, about 50% of the patient has these angiomyolopomas. Typically manifest at the younger age, that is mean age is about 30 years, and there is less female to male predominance with multiple bilateral and symptomatic tumors. So if you look at the clinical presentation, the classic triad, which shows the seizures, the adenoma, sebaceum, and the mental retardation, it could not be present in most of the patient because of the different gene mutations. Another one we have is the Wunderlich syndrome. It is important because it is a medical emergency in which basically results from the massive retroperitoneal hemorrhage, or basically rupture of these masses, and it's a complication, the important complication of renal angiomyolipoma, and it's reported in up to 10% of the patient and could be associated with significant morbidity and potential mortality if not promptly treated. Pregnancy is an important factor while we are managing the angiomyolipoma because there are high risk of rupture and resulting in emergency. So angiomyolipoma is the only benign renal tumor that is confidently diagnosed on cross-sectional imaging. As I previously mentioned, all of these benign lesions we are discussing mostly diagnosed after the surgical management, and very few that can be diagnosed before surgery, and angiomyolipoma is the only one in such category. Or if the Hounsfield unit is -20, we can consider it as a diagnostic HALMA. On angiography, aneurysmal dilatation is found in 50% of the angiomyolipoma, but again, this is non-specific. The size of the aneurysm has been reported to correlate with the risk of the rupture. So despite the radiographic hallmarks of angiomyolipoma, the diagnosis can be difficult to make in three of such scenarios. Number one is the confusion with the liposarcoma. Obviously, there is a fat presence in the liposarcoma, and on CT, again, the Hounsfield unit will be less as we seen in the angiomyolipoma. So it can get confused with the AML. Possibility of fat containing RCC. As we know that RCC has a heterogeneous structure containing solid and cystic area, so likely there could be possibility of fat, and there is again fat poor angiolipoma resembling an RCC. So these are three entities which kept in mind while confirming angiomyolipoma on radiographic evaluation. So intervention should be considered for larger tumors, particularly if the patient is symptomatic, taking into account the patient's age, comorbidities, and other related factors. A nephron-sparing approach by either selective embolization or open or laparoscopic or robotic partial nephrectomy is clearly preferred to radical nephrectomy. And especially if you are dealing with a patient who already have renal insufficiency, then we must consider nephron-sparing approaches. Treatment must be individualized, as I mentioned previously. There are cases in which pregnant females are there. We can't let them just for the observation. We have to manage them because there is a high risk of rupture. As well, the tumor size is important and the renal function status is important. And the treatment of choice in patient with acute hemorrhage is selective renal angioembolization, but this selective renal angioembolization is linked with a high rate of secondary procedures. So then we can go for elective management of larger angiolipomas, includes open or minimally invasive partial nephrectomies. Another one we have is the cystic nephroma. Diagnosis is basically bimodal distribution. First we see in the first 2 to 3 years of the life, and then we can appreciate it in the 4th or the 5th decade of life, with a significant female prevalence, that is 8:1. It could be solitary, centrally located, and widely variable in size, around 9 centimeter, and commonly demonstrate curvilinear calcification like this. And this is a solitary one, and this is the multiple one. And there is a herniation into the renal collecting system and septal enhancement. So it is a well-capsulated by a thick fibrous pseudocapsule and are composed of cysts lined by flattened cubital and hobnal epithelium, frequently stain positive for CD10, calretinine, and inhibin, estrogen, and progesterone receptor. Because of concern for cystic Wilms tumor, most children with cystic nephromas continue to be managed by radical nephrectomy, whereas a nephron-sparing approach with partial nephrectomy is feasible and attractive option. Again, it is a biopsy diagnosis in children. Another one is the MAST, mixed epithelial and stromal tumors. It is again a rare with few case reports in the literature, but we have seen one at SIOT and presented in TBM around 3 to 4 months back. So basically it is a MAST exhibits striking female predominance because it has again hormonal receptors, and mostly seen in the fifth decade. Mean age is around 46. Majority of the women diagnosed with a MAST had a history of receiving estrogen replacement therapy, and the only male patient, the largest MAST, was on androgen deprivation therapy for prostate cancer. Radiologic appearance of MAST is of complex cystic renal mass, typically classified at Bosniak 3 to 4 lesions, and indistinguishable from cystic RCC. Involvement of the renal hilum and compression of the pelvic ileal system is common, but gross infiltration of adjacent renal parenchyma is not seen. In our patient, it was compressing the hilum and it was causing a moderate hydronephrosis in the system, but there was no infiltration. The mesenchymal component, it is called mixed epithelial stromal tumor because it has both the components, the stromal component and the mesenchymal component. And the epithelial components vary from the regular tubules to complex tubular-papillary structure with or without cystic dilatation, lined by cuboidal to flattened epithelium that may show clear cell changes and have a characteristic hobnail appearance. ER and PR positive in most of the cases. A preoperative diagnosis of MAST should be considered in perimenopausal receiving hormone therapy, but again it is very difficult to diagnose such cases. Like in our case, we were suspecting a urothelial carcinoma because of the involvement of the pelvic ileal system. However, because radiographic differentiation from RCC is not reliable, surgical intervention, preferably with an nephron-sparing approach, should be offered to appropriately selected patients. And the other few, like papillary adenoma. Papillary adenoma is again a biopsy diagnosis because most of the time it is we are unable to distinguish it from the RCCs. And from the histopathological study, we can form a link that it is associated with the or it is a pre-malignant precursor of the papillary RCC. The incidence of papillary adenoma increases with age and male sex, and these tumors have been associated with acquired renal cystic disease seen on patients with hemodialysis. Another is the metanephric adenoma. Again, it is an incidental finding with a female predominance. It is indistinguishable from the RCC, and diagnosis is after surgical excision and can be confirmed with the immunohistochemical markers. This is again a rare one, juxtaglomerular cell tumor or adenoma. Only few hundred cases are reported in the literature, but importance here is this clinical presentation. Like most patients are presented due to the symptoms of the hypersecretion of the renin, includes hypertension and hypokalemia, and associated symptoms such as polydipsia, polyuria, myalgia, and headaches. The radiographic appearance that of a small, less than 3 cm solid hypovascular renal mass, surgical excision preferably sparing the remaining renal parenchyma results in rapid decline of the plasma renin levels, normalization of the blood pressure, and resolution of the associated symptoms. So it is a treatable. So we look at the guidelines regarding the benign diseases. They say that to treat Bosniak type 3 stage with the same as RCC or offer active surveillance. And Bosniak type 4 cyst should be treated the same as the RCC. While for angiomyolipoma with selective arterial embolization or nephron-sparing surgery, we should be considering treatment in the large tumors. They have not mentioned the size cutoff range for this large thing. Females of the childbearing age or the pregnant females, patient in whom the follow-up cases or access to the emergency care may be inadequate, or persistent pain or acute or repeated bleeding episodes. So these are few scenarios where we have to treat angiomyolipoma, and observation is not suitable here. Offer systemic therapy to patients at need for therapy with surgical unresectable AMLs, not amenable to embolization or surgery. There is a weak evidence for that. Prior to management, perform preoperative renal mass biopsy in patient with unclear kidney lesions, and offer active surveillance to patient with biopsy-proven oncocytoma as an acceptable alternative to surgery or ablation. So these are few things available in the guideline for such benign lesions. Now, if you look at the other part of this renal mass, we have the renal cell carcinoma. It constitutes around 60 to 70% of the total burden of these masses. So presentation, we have heard these typical triad for long, but we know that this is not present in all the patients, like hematuria flank pain in the abdominal mass. Or it could be due to the obstruction of these IVC thrombosis we are frequently seeing in our patients, bilateral lower limb extremity edema, or could be right-sided varicocele due to compression of the IVC. Or symptoms of the systemic disease, like if we have a metastasis in the lungs, it's the most common site for RCC. The persistent cough, bone pain, cervical lymphadenopathy, constitutional symptom, weight loss, fever, malaise, paraneoplastic syndrome. And then another aspect I want to discuss here is the screening for general population, or like we have huge bulk of patients with end-stage renal diseases and dialysis dependent. So what are the patients we will be offering screening for RCC? So patient with end-stage renal disease, screen only patient with long life expectancy and minimal major comorbidities. Periodic ultrasound examination, CT scan beginning during the third year on the dialysis. Or the patient with known VHL, we know there is a association with VHL and RCC, so they should be getting biannual abdominal CT 15 to 20 years, starting from the age of the 15 to 20 years. And if we are talking about the relatives of these patients with VHL, we have to get the genetic analysis done, and if it is these mutations are positive, then we have to follow the same criteria for VHL patients. And if no mutations are there, we don't have to do stringent follow-up. And the relatives of patient with other familial forms of cancer, then again we have to obtain periodic ultrasound or CT study and consider genetic analysis. In patient with tuberous sclerosis, periodic screening with ultrasound examination or CT should be done. And patient with autosomal dominant polycystic kidney disease, routine screening is not justified. If you look at the RCC, we have different histological variants, include the clear cell, which is constituted around 70 to 80%. And we have this clear cell RCC associated with the VHL, which is the familial syndrome. And it originates from the proximal tubule, aggressive behavior more common, tumor shrinkage common with targeted molecular therapy, like we are discussing these days, TKIs and things like that. And then another important variant we have is the papillary RCC. It is associated with basically two types of hereditary syndrome. The first one is the this one, hereditary papillary RCC, and the another is the hereditary leiomyomatosis RCC. Both of them have different type of mutations, and both of them originate from the proximal tubule, and type 1 has good prognosis and type 2 has worse prognosis. Another one we have the chromophobe RCC. As we have discussed previously, it is associated with the Bird-Hogdip syndrome, and it is originate from the intercalated cells of the collecting duct, generally good prognosis. Another one important one is this renal medullary carcinoma, because it is associated with the sickle cell disease trait. Now we have some other, the less common variety of these tumors include the sarcomas. Those sarcomas not very less common in our setup. We have seen multiple cases here, and wide local excision with confirmation of the negative margin is the treatment choice. Then we have renal lymphoma and leukemia. Biopsy should be considered, and typical management with chemotherapy and or radiation therapy. Then metastatic tumor, most commonly sites are the lung, breast, and GI cancers, and another is the malignant melanoma. Biopsy should be strongly considered. Carcinoids are the typically hypovasculars, and surgical excision is the treatment of choice. Then we have small cell carcinomas of the kidneys, and again, small cell, it's basically management lies on the chemotherapy. So multimodal therapy with surgery and platinum-based chemotherapy is the treatment of the choice. And then we have the neuroectodermal, again chemotherapy and followed by surgery, and Wilms tumor. Wilms tumor mostly seen in the pediatric population. Again, treatment includes the protocol for the which includes the chemotherapy and then surgery. So what is the take-home message? Renal mass is common incidental finding, and symptoms usually point towards the more serious lesion. Benign entities can only be confirmed on biopsy, so whenever possible, nephron sparing approach should be preferred. One common theme that has persisted is that RCC remains primarily a surgical disease. So the most important thing regarding the benign lesion is still we are getting these lesions from the final biopsy diagnosis. The patient we are operating for RCC or masses like malignant diseases, and we are getting these diagnoses like I will say discussing about MAST, or we have another case of myeloproliferative renal mass, which we were suspecting to be RCC and came out to be myeloproliferative disease. So important thing which should be considered or should be discussed in the future about the biopsies of these renal masses. So as I was studying in the literature for this presentation, what they are discussing now is about the targeted biopsies for such lesions, which could give us some high yield, and we will be considering more accurate diagnosis and then individualizing the treatment options rather than removing all the kidneys and then resulting in benign lesions. Thank you.
So it was a very good presentation and a very important one in that sense that we lately had one case, and that was a small boy, 7 years of age, who presented, I think, in the last week of Ramzan, when there was a mass on the left side, left flank, and we thought that this boy has been through some kind of trauma, and that is the only thing which is giving rise to the flank mass. But there was no pain, there was no hematuria, and actually on asking the father about this kind of abdominal mass, he says that in the last maybe 1.5 months it has reduced in size rather than increase in size. So it was nothing which happened very near to his presentation to the hospital. It was something which was already there. But we were still in the process of thinking that it was related to trauma. We never thought of something called cystic component of Wilms tumor, because that was not the kind of differential in the mind of any one of us who were dealing with the adult population. So it was something which later turned out to be a Wilms tumor component or a variant. We were in the process of doing away with something with a traumatized kidney in a cystic sort of background. So these are the kind of things that we have to look into. We always have to go through the differentials, even in malignancy or oncology. So this is one thing. The second thing is, one of the points in your take-home message. You see, the things are changing very fast. Nothing can be categorically said. For instance, if you say that this is primarily the only treatment option for RCC, meaning surgery, this is not the case now. Maybe 5 years, it will be the same thing as lymphoma. For a lymphoma in a kidney, surgery is not the first choice. It is something which is chemotherapy. So for renal tumor, the theories are changing. Now the theory is it is something to relate with immunology. So if you have got an immunological background to a tumor, then you have to strategize yourself. So for us, all you people who are younger than me at least, you'll be seeing a lot of things happening in your life. So the things that we do now as the only option for a particular pathology, it might not be there. So don't make your minds or thinking process something plastic. It should be elastic. Elastic and plastic means you have to absorb a lot of things, you have to change a lot. So don't make your thinking process something which is very stubborn, very static. Try to give space to a lot of new concepts. The second thing is about biopsy. Now, when I was at your age, it was something of iguna tha, ye kehna, कि I would like to do a biopsy for a tumor or a mass in the kidney, because a lot of people at that time thought that putting a needle into the mass, going through the skin and coming out will actually trace back and implant the tumor cells. But that is not the case now. Now we have got, as Dr. Aisha was also pointing out earlier, now if there is a mass which is less than 4 centimeter, you have to get hold of it, try to figure out what is the kind of pathology. Maybe it is oncocytoma. Their surgery is not warranted. So there are a lot of things that are changing, and you have to change along with it, right? So please make your minds a little bit of elasticity, create some elasticity in it. Otherwise, it will be very difficult to change ourselves. And these are very fast changing times. We have to change a lot of things. We have to adapt to a lot of different kind of paradigms. So this is one thing. Second, Mudassir, you want to say something? Yes. So we have been doing for the last 2 months, as I was saying earlier on 2 days back. So Mudassir has done a little bit of audit of that activity which you all have been doing. That is the online activity, and it was something of an experiment, but it turned out to be a good experiment for us. And it is something which we'll be selling to somebody else. Somebody else means some other departments of the same institute. So at 10 o'clock today, there'll be a meeting when I'll be selling your experience and your audits to them, ZA School and others, just to make them understand that there is a department who has taken a lead in the form of education. So the credit goes to all of you. The credit goes to all the respondents. Credit goes to positive thinking. Credit goes to something called non-depressive attitude towards education and towards everything in life. So please, Mudassir.
We all know what we have been doing since last 2 weeks since the corona hit the country, and this is a brief description of what we have done and what we have done. So why online studies? Because on 16 March 2020, the academic session at the institute was closed because of the corona pandemic, and then we realized that we have to continue the process of learning somehow, and then we came up with this idea. And the aim of this doing this practice was to continue the process of teaching and to stimulate the process of learning in the absence of direct resident and faculty interactions. So approach, we all know how we did it. There were 2 presentations weekly, and these presentations were done in the presence of few faculty members and the presenter and moderator. And then these presentations were uploaded on the YouTube. Then the residents were advised to see them, and this was followed by a small test of 5 MCQs. So there were total 10 presentations, starting from the 16th April to 20th May. And here we can see that the duration of the most of the presentations were ranged from as low as 20 minutes to as high as 64 minutes. But initially we planned to give the time allotted was about 30 to 40 minutes, and the mean time was 33 minutes. We checked the online views on the YouTube channel, and we saw that majority of the presentation was seen by more than 50 viewers. The total number of pool of residents are 55 that was supposed to see this presentation. So that means that majority of residents have seen this presentation. Response rate range from 90% to 76% in one presentation, 65%. So that was pretty good response rate. The mean score, if we see that they were different for different presentations, ranging from 51% was the lowest and 85% which was the highest. Then we broke up the score with respect to the year of residency, and surprisingly, the first year did the best, 78%, second year 64, third year 77, and senior registrar 77%. One of the thing is that in order to solve this question, there were two approaches used by residents. First was to see the questions, search online, and then respond. And the second was to respond directly and then see. So most of the first years actually did the first approach. That's why probably their score was better. But still, this is what it is. Then there was a separate weekly urology quiz, which was random test, more clinically oriented. And the score was, the response rate was better, about 90% in each. The score was relatively less compared to those presentations which were more simple, because this was random and more clinical. Then this was followed by a grand test, which included 50 MCQs. These were the same MCQs which were presented in the initial presentations. Now I was assessing the result of this, and what I noticed that the toppers, we always talk about the toppers, we always appreciate them, we always give them incentives in various forms, but probably the toppers do not need that much focus. The focus need these people who are at the bottom of the list. And here you can see that these are the lowest scores in the whole 55 residents who have scored. So as a faculty, as a team, as a department, we are supposed to focus on these people. I haven't shown their names because the aim is not to shame them, not to depress them. We will approach them, we will talk to them as a faculty and make sure that whatever help they need, so that they can do better next time. So in future, these people will be our focus rather than the toppers. Then we also did a quick feedback to to get the information that how you people think about this whole activity. I sent this feedback form to 55 residents. 42 of them responded, and the first question was at what time you do see this presentation. The majority responded at night or evening time. This is why we increased the time from the time limit from 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. So because most of the people see it in the evening. Then we asked which appliance you use. Majority people use the mobile phones. Some use computers from home and from the hospitals. That means for most of the people, this was doing these exercises was possible. Then we asked how much presentation should be done in each week. So 1 to 2 presentations. 69% think 2, 31%, only 7% say 3. So 1 to 2 presentations is enough for everyone. Is acceptable for everyone. Then we asked did this practice increase their knowledge? So majority agreed that yes, this did increase their knowledge. 14% strongly agreed and 83% agreed. Then we asked was the questions that were asked to them was relevant to the topic. Majority agreed that they were relevant to the topic. Then we asked about the presentation time. Did the presentation time was too long to make them fatigue? There was different answers, and majority feel that the time was higher to see that online presentation that made them fatigue. So this is one thing we asked the residents if they wanted to ask questions once they have seen the presentation, because in this type of interaction you do not have a direct interaction with the faculty to ask or to get your answers on the question. So if it take this 9.5% never, all of the others actually wanted to ask questions to different degrees. So that means about 91% of the residents feel that they wanted to ask questions after the end of presentation. But when we asked, did they contacted the presenter or any faculty member to get those answers? Well, majority didn't. 60% didn't contacted the presenter. Although all of you know who the presenter was, who the moderator was, who are the other faculty members you could have contacted, but majority of people, although they felt they had to contact, but they didn't contact. Then we asked if you had disagreement with the answer key. So only 19% said that they never had any disagreement with the answer key, but overall 81% felt some sort of disagreement with the answer key. But again, in spite of feeling this disagreement with the answer key, none contacted to the primary presenter or primary faculty member. This is something you all can, we are open to objections, and you can always contact us back if you feel there is any problem in the question. Again, this is what I was talking previously. What was the preferred method of solving the questions? Majority do it by directly solving the question and then going back to the answer, and about 30% say that they do reading first and then they solve the answers. This was again a question that we asked, that if they feel that some of their colleagues are using inappropriate means. By inappropriate means we mean that people see the question first and then read and then come back to answer. So majority feel only 21% said no, but 80% to some extent feel that they others were doing wrong. But for us, this is not a problem. Whether you see questions, then read and then answer, or answer and then see question, it doesn't matter, because we are not going to give you any individualized result. Whatever result you have, you see it yourself, nobody else knows it except for us. But we are not going to publish it, we are not going to show it as an individual result. We will only compile it as a group result, just what you saw in the year wise. So maybe in the future we'll do it in FCPS versus MS group, but not as individual. So this is a question about the intent of taking the test. Majority felt that they did it because to stimulate and continue the process of learning. Then we asked what future method of teaching you would like. Majority 45% agreed with the same method that we was doing, that is online presentation followed by a test. But the second most common 28% felt what we are doing now, that is presentation in the lecture hall followed by a quick test. So in agreement, total 80% think that there has to be a presentation whether online or in lecture hall followed by a test. So test will remain same and we are doing presentation. So in conclusion, the process of e-teaching during the COVID era has achieved reasonably good result. It is not only allowed the continuation of vital teaching and training, but also opened new innovative means of communication between faculty and students. Although we will someday switch back to pre-COVID times in the future, that is now, there are important lessons from this practice that should be incorporated in the system. So based on this, we recommend that online teaching should continue as it is cheap and effective in engaging residents. Online presentation can save morning hours of hospital service because time we spent here, we can use this time to do the services. Residents should be encouraged to contact faculty when they have questions or concerns regarding the topic presented. I talked about it. And there is need to make policy making to address other aspects of resident training, such as surgical skills, since this method of teaching cannot replace the surgical training that has to be taken into consideration. The limitations of this method of teaching and training, it lacks person-to-person interaction, which is vital for the skill of communication such as history taking. It lacks physical skill teaching such as surgery and such as written examination. And also it lacks the research-related teaching, which requires extensive interaction between resident and different departments apart from the urology department. Thank you.